What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Young Guns. I'm Will, along with my friends Jeffrey and Jackson. And today we have a very special guest, TJ Pittinger from Double Fries No Slaw. Thanks so much for joining us, TJ. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. Appreciate you guys having me on.
hmm So, what were the thoughts going into the season on Mike Norvell? Was this a make or break season for him, or do you think you guys were going to give him a little more time, just with how much the situation was going on before he came in?
Yeah, I think this season mattered a lot. I heard some things before the season started that unless the Knowles would have gone like 3-9 or 4-8 or something, like they weren't moving on from Norvell, right? Like this was his kind of team to coach and team to roll with. So I don't know that unless it like really went off the rails that they would have moved on either way. I do think that this season mattered a ton. I think that you look at what Florida State was able to do toward the back half of last year. They started the season pretty horrendously at 0-4, had the bad loss to Jacksonville State. But then they went 5-3 down the stretch, and their three losses, they were underdogs in all three of those games, and played really good teams, right? Like you played an NC State team that was pretty good. You without Jordan Travis, you played a Clemson team on the road and played them well, and then you lost by 3 at the end of the year to Florida. So I think that there was some optimism in the way that the year finished last year, and it was like, okay, cool. Can we see that carry over, right? Can we see that get to 7, 8-ish wins? I think that there was confidence that Florida State could get to 7 or 8. I don't know if 9 was expected, and then maybe 10 on Thursday if they can win. So going into the year, I think there was cautious optimism, like, hey, can the good finish from last year carry over into this season? And it certainly did. So yeah, I think most people were pretty reasonable, understanding with like what Norvell entered into, what things looked like at Florida State, and they were just hoping that things would keep trending up. But I don't think he was, again, unless it like really went crazy, I don't really think he was in any danger coming into this year to get fired.
How much did Jordan Travis overperform the expectations of what people laid out for him at the beginning of the season?
So again, he's another guy that it all kind of like started and stopped with him, right? If Florida State was to have a good year, it was going to be because he had a good year. And if Florida State was to struggle, it was going to be because he got injured. This was the first year that he started all 12 games and saw almost all of the reps. He did have to leave the Louisville game just before halftime, and didn't get banged up again besides that, right? Like the only other times he was coming out of games was because they had a huge lead. So yeah, I think the expectations for him were a little bit higher. They expected him to take a little bit of a step forward. He probably did exceed expectations some, but I think they were really confident in him through the spring and through the fall. He really like stepped up and grabbed that starting spot. And it was the first offseason where he didn't really have to compete for it. Had to kind of compete for it with Milton the year before, had to kind of compete for it with James Blackman the year before. So I think that, he definitely exceeded expectations, but I think that they thought that he was going to perform really well. They went out and it was the best offensive line Florida State's had since probably 2013 when they won the title. Best wide receiver core they've had since, I don't know, probably around that time, 14, 15, somewhere in there. So they really upgraded a lot of things and took some of that pressure off of him. But yeah, I mean, he was pretty spectacular this season.
On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the best, 1 being the worst, where would you rate the 2022 season of the Florida State Seminoles?
Yeah. So let's think about it. Probably like an 8 or 9, right? I mean, their over under in Vegas was a 6.5, right? So Vegas is telling you like they're going to barely make a bowl or they're going to win 7 games. And so you left a little bit on the table because you probably should have beaten NC State. They were favored against Wake Forest, but Wake was just better that day. And I think Vegas just kind of got that wrong. I think, bad matchup for Florida State in that game. Also think when you play somebody matters. I think that, if we would have played Wake Forest in November, probably would be 10-2 right now. And, if you had a redo of the NC State game, maybe you're 11-1. But, at the same time, you went on the road and you beat a Louisville team with a backup quarterback. You got a blocked extra point to beat LSU. And so I think it all kind of evens out, right? You have some breaks go your way. You have some go against you. So yeah, 8 or 9. I mean, you exceeded expectations, so it's an above average season. The expectations at Florida State are to compete for ACC championships and to compete for national championships. And Florida State didn't do that this year, but again, that wasn't really the season expectation that we had this year. And so yeah, I'd say it was an above average season. If you can get this win to get to 10 wins on Thursday, though I think bowls are relatively meaningless, I think that getting to the 10 wins and being able to say you won 10 games this year is kind of unique and kind of special. So yeah, I'd probably have it as a 9 if you win on Thursday, but that's where, your expectations move, right? Your expectations for the next year, 9 or 10 wins isn't going to be a 9 again. Like that's going to be a 7 or 8, right? You need to get to that 10 regular season wins and then an 11th, or you get to 11 regular season wins and then a 12th and a ACC championship, something like that. So I think for a regular Florida State year, this season was just kind of average, right? How many years did they finish with 10 wins over and over and over and over again? But for how they've been the last 5 years, this was a pretty fun one for sure.
Well, and this was the first time since 2016 that Florida State beat Florida and Miami in the same year. Like, that's pretty cool. Your guys clinched the Florida Cup this year.
Yeah.
So that is pretty cool. But also on the Cheez Bowl, when watching the Florida State Oklahoma matchup on ESPN, what are the strengths and weaknesses that Florida State has that everyone needs to watch out for?
Yeah, so Florida State's really, really good offensively. They've rushed for over 200 yards in the last 7 games in a row. Trey Benson has more broken tackles than anyone else who has the same number of rushing attempts as he does. In fact, it's by like 30. Like he's got like 30 more broken tackles than the next guy when you consider number of attempts kind of factored in. Jordan Travis can absolutely beat you with his arms or his legs. There really aren't a lot of weaknesses on the offensive side. They could be a little bit more efficient in the red zone. They could be a little bit better at certain times finishing drives. But when you look at this offense against the 2013 offense with Jameis and those guys, they had 1 less touchdown through 12 games, right? So Jameis and them piled on 10 more touchdowns through the ACC championship and the national championship. But through 12 games, I mean, they're basically on par with Jameis's offense, which is crazy to think about. That offense was ridiculous. And so not a lot of weaknesses offensively. Defensively, like they're pretty boom or bust, Florida State, it feels like against good teams, has put together about 1 good half of defense. And sometimes that's the first and third quarter, and sometimes that's the middle 2 quarters, and sometimes that's the first and fourth, whatever. Like it just never seems to be a complete game. Against Louisville, you got about 2 good quarters. Against LSU, you probably had 3 good quarters. Against Florida, you had 2 good quarters. Against Wake Forest and Clemson, you had 2 good quarters of defense. And so when they've played better teams, their defense hasn't showed up for the full game. And I think that is a little bit of how Florida State's defensive strategy is. I think a little bit of that is just kind of the way they play. But if there is a weakness on this team, it's probably the secondary. It's probably the defense. They've at times given up big plays. They play a back a lot and make teams nickel and dime them. They don't give up the big play often. And so if a team is patient and willing to work the ball down the field, then, you can move the ball on FSU at times. And they're kind of waiting on you to, run out of space there by getting close to the end zone or have to settle for a field goal or whatever. And then they know that they've probably got 7 points coming right back out when their offense comes on the field. So strength is definitely the offense. Weakness sometimes can be the secondary. I mean, there's been times where the defense played really, really well. And if they do put it together, or if that first half is the good half, like you saw in the Miami game, you get up by 30 points at halftime, and it doesn't matter if you play good defense or not the second half. The team's already kind of quit. So that's probably how I'd line it all up right now.
Well, we're definitely watching for that secondary, see if Oklahoma can exploit it or not.
Mm-hmm. How important was the LSU win to take some of the pressure off of Mike Norvell?
Yeah, I think that was huge, right? Like you went on the road, you were an underdog, basically in their hometown. Shout out to FSU fans, absolutely showed out. I mean, it was 50-50 at best, if not more. FSU fans, they were definitely louder. They had more to cheer about through the whole game. So that might be some of it. But Bourbon Street was crazy with FSU fans, like all 3 nights that I was down there. And so, yeah, I think you needed that game, right? Like I think you you were close in some big games last year. You had a lead against Clemson late in the game and couldn't hold on to it. You were in the Florida game late, but you couldn't find a way to get over the hump. And so I think you needed that to kind of make a statement and kind of let people know, like, hey, man, we're not back in the sense of, winning national titles every couple of years or dominating the ACC or anything, but Florida State's like at least back into national relevance again. And so, yeah, and that game was huge for him because I think that, they kind of choked down the stretch, but Florida State dominated that game. I mean, into the fourth quarter, LSU didn't have 100 yards rushing or passing. And then the fourth quarter, they went on a long drive. Florida State then fumbled a ball on the 1 yard line that would have put them up 2 scores with like a minute to go. LSU drives down and almost ties it up. But yeah, I think that game was massive just to kind of let people know, like, oh, okay, well, if they can beat LSU, they can beat anybody else on the schedule. And they didn't win every other game, but it kind of gave the team confidence. It gave the fan base confidence of like, okay, well, maybe we're playing with something here. So yeah, I think that game was massive and a really big way to start off the year.
Mm-hmm. How important do you think the new coaches were on the staff with Alex Atkins coming in as offensive coordinator and Randy Shannon joining and Adam Fuller as the co-DC?
Yeah, so I think pretty big that I think that Atkins moving up to offensive coordinator is big because it really lets Mike like have kind of full control of the offense. Like Mike's calling the plays, Alex gives input and stuff like that, but it's Mike Norvell's offense, and so him being able to just have full control and full reins on that is huge. And then Alex Atkins is one of the best recruiters in the country and incredible at developing offensive linemen. And so honestly, the biggest part of Atkins being made the OC is that you kept him, right? Like I think if we wouldn't have made him the OC, somebody else would have, and you'd have lost him. And so that'd have been really detrimental, right? Like because he's been amazing on the trail. They've picked up. We talked about off air. We talked about Fisk, but they also picked up the number 1 offensive line prospect at the time that they got him. Another guy's entered and he's ahead, but Jeremiah Byers from UTEP, and so. They've also picked up Keandre Jones from Auburn and Casey Roddick from Colorado and stuff. So, yeah, I think just what they've been able to pick up in the transfer portal and offensive line. I know you're a Notre Dame guy. Gibbons was really good for us for 2 years. That kind of worked out well for all parties, I think. But I think that having Atkins there is the biggest piece. And then second on Shannon, yeah, I mean, guy has head coaching experience at a couple of different places. And so when you're able to pull a guy that's got head coaching experience and he's a linebacker / co-DC for you, he just knows the game, right? Like he may or may not have had success as a coach, a head coach. And, it's hard, winning is difficult and only the truly elites are able to sustain it for a long time. And so getting a guy that's got head coaching experience and kind of add that to your staff is massive. The linebackers took a huge step forward this year. Kalen DeLoach, Tatum Bethune, DJ Lundy, all 3 of them got way better. Tatum, a transfer from UCF. So, yeah, I think both those guys were really, really big for Florida State. And then Florida State did pretty well in the in recruiting both of those positions, both offensive line and linebacker this season. So, yeah, I think both coaches were, a huge positive for the Noles this year.
Right. So, in December of 2021, a little bit after the regular season ended, this 5-star recruit, Travis Hunter, who was going to go to Florida.
I've never heard of this guy. I don't want to talk about this.
Oh,
I'm giving you a hard time. Go ahead.
But yeah, when Jackson State was able to do this unprecedented move, nobody's really ever seen happen. Flipping him from Florida State to Jackson State, right? Did it really make the seat hotter for Mike Norvell at the time?
Yeah, I think so. I think the way they finished the year, going 5-3 down the stretch. Now, you'd have really liked to beat Florida, right? To go 6-2 down the stretch, and then you'd have made a bowl game, and there would have been some more positivity. I'll say this: I don't think that would have changed anything with Travis Hunter. I think he was already gone by that point. But I do think there was some good positivity coming out of the second half of the season. And there was positivity in the recruiting class. It was like, hey, well, we have the number 1 player committed. This is kind of a destination. Ballers like to play with ballers, right? Like, so Travis comes and then more kids are going to want to play with him. So, yeah. So I left the Florida game and I wasn't even really that upset. I was kind of more upset that the season was over because they were good down the stretch and they were fun to cover and they were fun to watch down the stretch and they did fight for each other and you were watching growth happen. And so I mean, you want to beat your rivals, right? But like they were a 3-point underdog. They lost by 3, whatever. I mean, I wasn't like, oh my God, how could they lose this? It was like, they lost by what Vegas told you they're going to lose by. But, so but I was sad that like the season was over. I was like, man, this team was really fun to watch, like them kind of turn it around. And so in getting closer to the athletic team and department I've kind of become a little bit detached from the results, right? Like when they win, I will get excited, but when they lose, it's just like, okay, well, got to keep grinding out and working and stuff, and it's not the same. I walked around the day that on signing day last year, like my puppy got kicked in the face. Like I walked around like moping and sad, and my wife was like, "What is wrong with you?" And I was like, this is the beginning of the end. Like Norvell's going to get fired, not from that one thing, but I was like, it's just going to keep, this is what's going to take us off the tracks. Like nobody's going to want to come here. We'll go 5-7 again next year. And then they'll fire him the year after that. I was just like in such a bad mood. So yeah, that was a rough day. I don't even remember what the question specifically was, but yeah, that day was a tough one. And it was tough for all FSU fans because there was so much excitement and stuff after the season or toward the back half of the season. And then, you're kind of building all your hopes and dreams on, hey, we're going to have a really, really good recruiting class here. We're going to finish really well. We're going to have like a top 12, 10-ish class. And then when he decommitted, I think we finished like 19th or 20th or something. A couple other guys flipped last second. And so, yeah, that was probably the worst day. That was a pretty rough day. I will say, though, as negative as I was, you asked about the seat getting hot. Yeah, I don't know if that one thing made the seat get hot, but I think that, it made the season that much more important this year. Like, okay, well, what can they do this year? But since then, I mean, everything's gone for a pretty much, a 180. Everything's kind of like turned around since all that happened.
What was the mood? What was the mood on the Florida State fan base when they lost the 3 games in a row this season? It was no panic. They were just like, we're going to turn it around, or it was 3 tough losses, or was there a legitimate concern with Mike Norvell that he wasn't the guy again?
I think you're fringe fans, right? Like, I think, kind of like they talk about like with politics or anything else like that. Don't cancel me for talking about politics, but you got like 10% crazy on this side, 10% crazy on this side. And then you're like 80% of just like America, just like sitting here, just like, hey, dog, I just got to go to work and watch sports. Like, leave me alone. So I think that's how most fan bases are too, right? Like you got like 10% that like no matter what Norvell does, they'll always hate him. And you got like 10% that like he could go 0-12 next year and people would still support him. And you're like, both of y'all are crazy. Like 80% of us are just like living here in the middle. So no, I think most of the fan base, so excluding those, 10% on each side, I think most of the fan base understood a few things. One, the Florida State had their toughest 3 games scheduled back to back to back, right? And you really would have liked to steal one of them. But I think most fans knew that was going to be an incredibly difficult stretch for Florida State and that it was going to be very tough to win any of them. Now, they probably blew the NC State one and should have had that one. But I think it was, hey, we played that Clemson one tough. We played NC State tough, even though we kind of blew it in the end. Let's see how they finish the year. They've got an opportunity to go out and win every game for the rest of the year. Let's see how they do. And they did, right? Like they came out and finished the rest of the year off really, really strong. I think it was, okay, you had 4 in a row that you won. You had 3 in a row that you lost. Some people were pretty upset with that. But again, you beat LSU in their backyard. You beat Louisville with a backup quarterback. And so I think there were also some injuries. Fabian Lovett was out. Jared Verse was out some of that time. And so I think they knew that, hey, if we were fully, you played your toughest 3 teams when you were the least healthy, that's going to be tough to win. And so I don't think there was too much uproar over it. I think it was like, okay, well, let's get into the bye week and let's beat Georgia Tech. We beat Georgia Tech. Let's go down the road against Miami. That's our toughest one left. We thought, right, going down the road, beat the heck out of Miami. Everybody was back on board. At that point, I think the record was 6-3, and everybody was, pretty chilled out. But it was very like, okay, can't let those 3 losses turn into 4 more losses, right? Or keep it going negative. It's like, how do we rebound? And so the bye week came at a good time, and they were able to kind of turn things around.
So with Florida State taking on Oklahoma, did fans want a tougher team in the bowl game, or they're like, all right, 10 wins already, let's go?
Yeah, a little bit of both, probably, right? The options, right? When you look at all the predictions and stuff before it was announced, the options were to play in the Duke's Mayo Bowl against either Maryland or Minnesota, or the Cheez-It Bowl against Texas Tech or Oklahoma. I don't think Maryland or Minnesota would have meant anything to FSU fans, and I also don't think they wanted to go to Charlotte, right? I think, a lot of people live here in Florida. They wanted to stay close if they could. And I don't think they wanted to play either one of those teams. Not because, I think they would have blown either one of those teams out. Very easy wins for either of them. But who wants to play Maryland or Minnesota? No offense to any of those fans that may or may not hear this or watch this. And then you look at the other side, Texas Tech and Oklahoma. I think Texas Tech would have been a more interesting game, right? They're probably a little bit better of a team, but Oklahoma's the bigger brand. I think Florida State has lost at least their last 3 to Oklahoma, lost the national championship in 2000, and then lost a home and home in 2011 and 2010. And so I think there's a little bit of excitement to be able to play a really big brand, even though the team itself is not very good. So, yeah, in a perfect world, would have loved to play they're in the playoff, obviously, but a TCU or somebody that's really good in the Big 12, but just understood that, just kind of is what it is. At least we're getting a big brand and not getting stuck playing like Maryland or something like that.
Yeah.
Do you think that with Oklahoma having all these opt-outs that there's a potential chance that Florida State could overlook Oklahoma because of the fact, anyway, even if Oklahoma had their full team, Florida State would be favored in this game, and maybe it would potentially be a tougher matchup. But with these opt-outs, even though on paper Florida State's way better, they should blow them out. Is there a potential chance for an overlook?
I don't think so. I think that something that Mike Norvell has done really, really well is get the team up for games. And they played a lot of bad teams down the stretch this year. Georgia Tech played without their starting quarterback. Actually, they played like 3 or 4 teams in a row without their starting quarterback. It was pretty nuts. Or their starting quarterback was in but kind of hobbled. So they played Georgia Tech, then Miami, then Schrader did play for Syracuse, I think, but was pretty hobbled, not very good. And then Louisiana's starting quarterback was out. And so all 4 of those were bad teams. And Florida State did blow out, but they came out and absolutely put the pedal on the floor and didn't take any opponent lightly. And I think that they've done a really good job of that. When they've played bad teams, they've beaten the crap out of them, right? And so I don't think so. And I'm not necessarily saying that Florida State wins this game by 40, but I think Norvell's done a really good job of making sure that guys get up for games. I think it's really, really important for Florida State and their players, 0 opt-outs, whether NFL, portal, whatever. Like the guys leaving in the portal are playing in this game. And they've all talked about how much this game means to them, how much getting to 10 wins means to them, how much playing for this university means for them. And so, yeah, with all of that coming in on the back end, I would be shocked if Florida State comes out and just lays an egg or doesn't show up with the kind of effort that you are expecting. I think that they'll come out kind of firing and ready to go.
To your earlier point about, how most of the fan base is really happy with Coach Norvell at the moment. If Florida State was to, as you said, lay an egg against Oklahoma, would the percentage of Florida State fans that are happy with him stay the same, or would it go down, so to speak?
Maybe just slightly. Football's a weird sport, right? And sometimes weird things happen, and you certainly don't want to go out and lose a bowl game against your team you're like a 10-point favorite against that's got a bunch of opt-outs and playing in your backyard. I do think there'd be a little bit of hey, what the heck are we doing here? But I also think that bowls are largely irrelevant, and it's hard to say, oh, the results of the bowl this year or that year are going to matter for going forward. I think it'd be kind of like the NC State game where you're like, oh man, that was a missed opportunity. I think the way that they would potentially lose a game matters too. If they come out and score 18 points or something stupid, I think that the fans will be like, what the heck is going on? If this ends up being a 42-45 game and it's just a crazy shootout or something, I think you just kind of tip your hat to the other team and say, hey man, we blew an opportunity. We should have done a little bit better. Go out and get them next year. So yeah, but I don't think anybody, unless Florida State loses this game 52-3 or something stupid like that. I don't think anybody really cares if they. I don't want to say don't care, but I don't think anybody's firing Norvell over any kind of result that happens on Thursday.
Well, no, because as the attitude going in 2023 is you never know because college football's a crazy world.
Yeah, and I think there will be a little bit of letdown, but I also think that with the guys coming back, with how if they were to lose, how they end up losing does matter for sure.
Right. So the keys to victory will be that offense, of course. But what else will they have to do in order to beat Oklahoma?
Yeah, I think they need to get, kind of outside of like your cliche kind of common things like, win the turnover battle and no special teams mistakes and this, that, and the other. I think that they do need to get, really good pressure on Gabriel and get after him. Oklahoma having 2 starting tackles out and Florida State having some of the best defensive pass rushers in the country in Jared Verse and others. I think that they really need to get in that backfield and make kind of life heck for him. And I think they will. I think they'll do a pretty good job of that. The secondary has to step up. I mean, like I said, I think that that's been the weakness. And if Oklahoma's to exploit that and keep this a game for longer, then, who knows what happens in the third or fourth quarter, right? But if Florida State's defense can step up, start the game well, get a few stops to start the thing, I think that it's probably a 10-ish point game or, maybe 14, somewhere in there. But I think that you could very realistically see a scenario where Florida State jumps on Oklahoma like 17-3 or 21-3 or something like that. And you just kind of see Oklahoma say, all right, get us to the end of this game. This season sucks. 6-6. Let's just move on and move out of here. I'm not saying that. I'm not trying to say Oklahoma's definitely going to quit in this game or anything like that. But I just think that's pretty common with kind of what we see. I mean, if you watch that Florida-Oregon State game, that's pretty much what happened. The game was 17-0. I think Florida fans were just we're out. Our Florida players were just we're out of here, man. We're ready to move on. We didn't commit to this coach. We're ready to just go our separate ways. And so I'm not saying that definitely happens with Oklahoma, but I think that if you jump on them early, you could kind of win this pretty handily going away.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that point for sure. But with Florida, they had a lot more transfer portal players and opt-out players than Oklahoma does, and they didn't have their starting quarterback. So I definitely think Oklahoma will be a bit more formidable because they at least do have Dylan Gabriel. Yeah. But do you think that Florida State's offense matches up better with Oklahoma's defense, or Florida State's defense matches up better with Oklahoma's offense?
Yeah, no, I think Florida State's offense matches up much better. Oklahoma's defense hasn't been great this year. And Florida State's defense or offense has, been top 10 all year based on both yards per play. And if you just look at FPI and stuff, efficiency ratings and stuff, Florida State's offense has been really, really good. They've moved the ball well. Like we said, we talked about how they had one less touchdown than that 2013 offense. Their yards per game is actually 4 yards more per game, which I know 4 is not a big number, but essentially right on par with that 2013 team. And so, yeah, the offense all year has been pretty remarkable and pretty spectacular. And, Oklahoma could even have a good defense. And I would really, really like Florida State's offense because they've just been good against everybody. I'd love to see – I wouldn't want to see – this is going to sound wild. Don't cancel me for this. But I wouldn't want to see Florida State's offense up against – or I'm sorry, Florida State's defense up against Georgia's offense. But I would love to see Florida State's offense up against an elite defense. I'd love to – I mean, I don't think we'd beat Georgia. That's not my take at all. But I just love to see how they went up against a really good defense. Okay, well, they look good against defenses that aren't great. How do they look when a defense is really, really good? They score 28 points, right, instead of 45 or whatever that number is. So, yeah, I think that'd be interesting. But, yeah, I really like the matchup of Florida State's defense against our Florida State's offense against Oklahoma's defense for sure.
So how fired up do you think Florida State's fans are to take on their old foe, Brent Venables? Of course, Clemson's been really successful, and he's been a big part of that. What do the fans think about taking him on in the bowl game?
Yeah, I think they're excited. I think they're more excited that he's not at Clemson anymore. and they've seen that kind of, Clemson kind of come back down to earth a little bit. But, yeah, I think they're excited to see him. I mean, I think Florida State fans were ready for Venables and Jeff Scott and all the guys that, Elliott. I think they've been excited for all those guys to leave because they think that, that's kind of what happened with Bowden, right? Bowden had all those great coordinators, and same a little bit with Jimbo. Had great coordinators, and then they all left to go take head coaching jobs. And that's what happens when you're successful. Guys don't stick around. And so, I think that they were excited to see all those guys leave. But, yeah, I think they always liked Brent Venables because they had so much respect for him as being a great coordinator. And they think that he'll do good things at Oklahoma. But, yeah, I think they're excited to go up against him, but they're even more excited that he's not at Clemson anymore.
So what was it like getting to see Florida when the schedules were announced this year? What was it like getting to see Florida State playing on Black Friday? What was that like?
So I don't know. I had a lot of thoughts when that came out, and I actually liked it. I liked the fact that it was the only show in town. There were some pros and cons, though. Okay, so the biggest con was that we do a big tailgate for most games, and so I always get to town the day before, so that I can do everything that needs to be done. Run to the liquor store, run to Publix, run here, run that, like do all the things, right? Like to get ready for the tailgate, which usually starts at like 1 or 2 o'clock, and so there was no one. And usually, like the night before the game, there's this big block party. Everybody's hanging out, having a drink. Like it's just amazing. None of that was happening on Thanksgiving, and everything was closed. So I just sat like a loser on the couch and just drank a little craft beer and watched the football game. I will say, shout out the GOAT though. Because of that, and because we couldn't go out, I sat on the couch and watched the Egg Bowl. So I did get to watch Mike Leach's last win, so that was cool. But yeah, that was the biggest con to me. Was like I was sitting in an apartment by myself like a loser on Thanksgiving. Because nobody, well, I guess I stayed with some friends, so my friends were there, but like, yeah, there was like me and one other person sitting there watching the game because nothing to do in Tallahassee. But as far as the game being on Friday, it was amazing because you're the only show in town. Everybody's focused on you. We watched the World Cup at the tailgate. You didn't have to keep up with like a million other games that were going on. There was just a few games here and there. And then I got home Saturday at like 1 o'clock and just watched college football all day. It was amazing that I didn't have to. You usually miss all the rivalry games. You miss the Iron Bowl. You miss that. You miss the game. So it was cool to be able to watch all the other college football games. So they're not like this year. It's already back to Saturday, but I'd be fine with them keeping that on Fridays. I think that.
I mean, that was so cool. Like when I heard about it being on Black Friday for 2022, it was like I felt like a little kid getting candy hearing that announcement because it was like you don't see that every year. On Black Friday. But, I don't think they're going to go back to that next year. They're just going to go back to regular Saturdays, but left me wanting for more, that's for sure.
Same here. I liked it.
I think the ironic thing about that Florida State game is how the Florida players, the way they played it, that was like their bowl game because how so many players entered the portal and opted out for that bowl game against Oregon State. The way Florida played against Florida State, they gave it their all, and that was a fantastic game. I just think it's ironic that rivalry game was almost, to me, like the bowl game for Florida.
Yeah. No, and they did. They had not been good the last couple of years, last couple of weeks before that, but they definitely played up for that one, and it looked like you could tell, and they always do, right? Like they looked terrible the last two games before the Florida State game in 2021, and then they really got up for the rivalry game, and that's typically what happens here. Even when both teams or one team is pretty bad, like the game itself usually is pretty good between the two.
Who do you think? I know there's no opt-outs, so the young players might not play as much as usual. But who's going to be like a breakout young player for Florida State on offense and defense, like a freshman or sophomore that is a little unheralded?
So this is kind of cheating. I don't know if I don't know if this one really counts or not. But Pat Payton won the ACC's Rookie of the Year, and with Jared Verse and Fabian Levitt getting all the attention there on the defensive line, I think that less people have heard of Pat Payton, even though he won the ACC's Defensive Rookie of the Year. He's the guy that I think you really look at and say like, okay, he's the next great edge rusher at Florida State, who's had a long history of really good edge rushers, and even the last couple of years with Jermaine Johnson and Kiara Thomas, and now Jared Verse. So Pat Payton's a big one. Azariah Thomas is a true freshman. He was a borderline 5-star, but he's a high 4-star kid, and has been really good for the Noles this year. Has gotten in. I think he got a pick in that Louisiana game. I could see him getting in and getting some burn for sure, especially if Florida State's able to build a little bit of a lead. I think that he'll get in and kind of be a young guy that you might see like really, bust out and star a little bit. I think that Florida State's running back room is so deep, and so this is a tough one. I'll make this prediction, but I don't expect it to be like crazy or anything. Florida State obviously has Trey Benson, Trayshawn Ward, and Lawrence Toafili as their top 3 running backs. Really a kind of a 3-headed monster. There's also a freshman, Rodney Hill, who is really, really good. And I think that you could see some from him on Thursday. Again, if the lead gets big enough. Not that he can't come in and contribute, but if it's a close game, I think they're going to want to try and get the older guys reps because you want to lean on your upperclassmen in that situation.
So What went wrong against Wake Forest, North Carolina State, and Clemson?
Yeah, so kind of different things in each one of them, right? Wake Forest, they just could not get any offense going. I think we knew that Wake Forest's offense would be really, really good, and really, the Wake Forest game was our worst offensive game of the year. It wasn't even close. They had 7. They scored on the very first drive. I took my family to that game. It was the week the hurricane came through the state, and so everything, like all our plans for the weekend, got canceled. And I just said, like, "Hey, you guys want to go up to the game?" So we took our family up. I took them down on the field for like the pregame stuff, right? Like, so they got to see the Osceola and Renegade plant the spear and the fireworks and all this stuff. My kids think it's the greatest thing ever. So ton of fun. We had not even gotten back up to the seats by the time Florida State scored their first touchdown. And I looked at my wife and I was like, man, this game's going to be super easy. Like, we're just going to throw all over them and run all over them today, and it's going to be amazing. We didn't score again until the third quarter. And so, yeah, I think that the offense just could not get going there. And then kind of similar in the NC State game, I think the offense kind of struggled second half. And really, I mean, you scored 17 in the first half against a good NC State defense, and then couldn't get anything going in the second half. Just, kind of like a comedy of errors all over. It's the game that Mastromato, the punter, like ran past the line and punted the ball. This was a 5-yard penalty from that spot. It was like a 60-yard penalty. It was, that game was tough. And then Clemson, you were just really bad right before and right after halftime. You had a fumble when you were down. I think we were down 7 and nearing midfield, and Florida State fumbled the ball. After that fumble, Clemson scores to go up 14, and then the very next drive, or to go up 10, and then the very next drive outside of the second half, Clemson runs like a 70-yard kickback and then scores on the next play. And so I think that you were just really bad through like the middle 8, 4 minutes on each side of the half, and that's kind of what cost you against Clemson. So, yeah, I mean, in those 3 games, I mean, you just honestly just made too many mistakes against NC State, and Clemson offense just kind of let you down against Wake.
What do you think the ceiling and the floor is for Florida State next season?
Yeah, Florida State could go 12-0 next year. And I'm not predicting that, but Florida State can beat every team on the schedule. They open up with LSU in Orlando, so they kind of bookend the games here at Camping World Stadium. And so they can beat LSU, and they should beat both their rivals again. And then it kind of comes down to Clemson. With the ACC going to the pod scheduling, they don't have NC State on the schedule this year. Wake Forest is not going to have Hartman, it sounds like, as he just declared for the transfer portal.
I think he's coming to South Bend.
Yeah, which is great for me because you guys play Clemson, so hopefully he beats them. But I think that Florida State could win every game on their schedule. Now, they probably won't, right? I just don't think they're at that level yet. I don't think they're ready to do that yet. But they could certainly go out, and they should be favored in probably 10 of the 12 games that they play. Maybe they'll be favored in 11. They got to go on the road at Pittsburgh. Like, I'd like that to be an earlier game as opposed to a later game. I don't want to play that like in November. But yeah, I think their ceiling is 11, 12 wins and competing for an ACC championship. The floor has to be like 8 or 9. Like, I just think the way the schedule sets up, like, there aren't enough games on there that I'd be comfortable with Florida State losing. Like, if they split with Florida and LSU, right? Like, so you go 1-1 against the SEC, I think you'd have to like tip your cap and say like, all right, well, that's fine. You won one, you lost one. One game is the Florida game's in the swamp, and then the other one's a neutral site, which you'd think that Florida State would have more fans there, but it'd probably be pretty close to 50-50. So I think splitting with the SEC. Say you lose to Clemson, you can't lose to Miami. You can't. Maybe you lose on the road to Pittsburgh. All right, so that's 9-3, right? Like, you can't lose anything else. There's nobody else on the schedule that's good enough for me to say, like, oh, you could lose that game. Duke comes to town. You can't lose to Duke in Tallahassee, even though they had a nice year this year. They play Syracuse. Can't lose to Syracuse. That game's at home this year. Again, I think Miami will be fine in a couple of years. I don't think you can lose to them this year upcoming. So, yeah, I think the floor – I mean, the absolute floor to me has to be 8. But you play at Boston College, you should win that game. Virginia Tech comes to town, you should win that game. So I think it's somewhere between 8 and 9. You can't have less than 8 this year, especially the fact that, for all intent and purposes, we'll see what happens on Thursday, but they're probably going to go win on Thursday. For you to drop back 2 games from that would not be good. So, yeah, I think 9-ish is kind of what fans are going to say. Like, all right, you got to get 9 to probably get to that 10 or 11 mark.
Yeah, watch out for Pittsburgh at Pitt. I mean, they are a nightmare. If you're a ranked team going there, they will bite you on the butt when you're not looking. And by the way, when you look at the pod scheduling, right, Miami and Clemson are annual opponents, right? But why Syracuse but not Georgia Tech?
So I guess it's been enough time where I can just go ahead and say this. I heard Georgia Tech didn't want that. I heard Georgia Tech was like, no, thank you. Georgia Tech already has Clemson on the schedule every year. And I don't think they wanted to have to play the best 2 teams in the ACC every single season, which I kind of get, right? Like give them – I mean, that's 0-2 for them every single year, going into that pod. So I kind of get it. Florida State kind of likes the fact of being a little more regional up there, right? Like, so they already dominate the Atlanta market. And so from a media perspective, you're now entering into that New York market, which is kind of a little bit different, right? Something a little bit, kind of out there or whatever. That I think that from a marketing perspective, they do kind of like that and being able to get some traction up there. But from what I was told, Florida State kind of went into those meetings and just kind of said like, hey, we know we got Clemson and Miami. Just tell us who our third one is. We don't really care. Like give us whoever. We already have the toughest 2. Whoever you stick us with next is fine. Yeah,
some of the teams that some of the pods are just kind of confusing to me, but maybe that's just me, because Wake Forest, they don't have all the North Carolina schools, but
yeah.
So they only got Duke.
What do you think about Kenny Dillingham? Like 1 year he was like left Florida State, then he went to Oregon, and now suddenly he's the head coach already. Like, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think he was looking, and a lot of FSU fans didn't want to lose him, but I think he was looking for that kind of job that would give him a chance to go out and be a head coach somewhere. And I think that they are. I mean, I like Kenny a ton. We've interacted a little bit and chatted a little bit here and there, but I like Kenny a lot. I think he's got a ton of passion. He's got a ton of enthusiasm. I think he'll recruit really, really well. I think he's got a pretty good offense and will do, fairly good things there too. So, I just hope, kind of like what you just alluded to, I just hope it's not too early. Like, I hope that he's able to get it going and stuff, because I know it's his dream job and I know he wants to, he wants to absolutely crush it there. But I just hope that he's able to get it and get it going quickly. Because I don't, it's tough, man. When you get your dream job, if you maybe get a little too early, like, so Willie Taggart always says that Florida State was his dream job, but it just seems like he probably wasn't fully ready yet. Maybe if that job would have come around later, he might have been a little more ready. So I don't know. Sometimes you need to kind of cut your teeth somewhere smaller, somewhere not Power 5. Norvell did that at Memphis. Other coaches have done that at different places. Napier did that at Louisiana. So I do think there's a little less pressure being at Arizona State as opposed to like Florida or Florida State. But yeah, I don't know. I hope it works out though, because I like Kenny a ton. Like, you see some of his recruiting hype that he's doing on the TL and stuff, and it's pretty interesting to see. But I hope it works out because I really do like him.
And before we wrap up the show, for those who don't know about what shows you do or where they can find, would you like to tell the audience where they can find you?
Sure. Yeah. If you watch this on YouTube or on any kind of social media, you can just search Double Fries No Slaw or Double Fries Pod, and everything will kind of come up there. We do a show on YouTube once or twice a week, and then we just do a lot of kind of organic short form videos where we, maybe rant or complain or whine or brag about something for 5 or 10 minutes on YouTube and then throw it out into a video. So yeah, if you search for Double Fries No Slaw, Double Fries Pod, you'll find us on social media, and on YouTube is where we're at mostly.
Well, anybody wants to check out some Florida State content, check out Double Fries No Slaw. And, if you want to talk some Florida State, talk with this man, TJ Pittinger.
Thanks so much, TJ. You're awesome, man. Really appreciate it.
Dinner, man.
And enjoy the rest of your holiday season.
Thanks, guys. You too.
Stay warm. Out.
I'm trying. Yeah, I've tried to flex on you. This is not a background. This is real. Like, I'm just outside. So it's been okay here in Florida. So thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.